every person in tech needs to understand this very, very basic concept, which is there is a technology adoption cycle.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to Scaling DevTools, the show that investigates how DevTools go from 0 to 1. I am really excited about today's episode because I'm joined by Shawn Wang, who is known on the internet as Swyx, and has been someone that I've looked up to for a long time and read pretty much everything that he's put out on the internet. Shawn is a writer, a speaker, head of developer experience at Airbyte, chief editor of dx.tips, which is one of the best resources out there for developer experience and developer growth. Shawn, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Excited to chat about today's topic, which I actually have in my bio, and you're the first person to ask me about it.
Amazing. And so the topic in your bio is crossing the chasm. Could you tell us a little bit about crossing the chasm?
Maybe I'll bounce this off of you. Did you hear about crossing the chasm before in the context of tech?
I had a vague kind of feeling that I've heard of it, but it's also now hard to disentangle like what I knew before reading about your stuff. But I'd say no.
It's interesting because I feel like every person in tech needs to understand this very, very basic concept, which is there is a technology adoption cycle. Things get invented and then they filter out into the broader population. Some technologies fail to get mass adoption. Some technologies get mass adoption very quickly. And essentially understanding what succeeds and what doesn't is the primary goal that you should have as a technologist, whether or not it is choosing where to work, whether or not it is choosing what tools to adopt, or whether or not it is starting your own if you have those ambitions someday. This is a very general purpose skill set that you should develop basically throughout your entire tech career because it's extremely valuable. Understanding what to work on and how to pick and how to encourage things that eventually cross the chasm. The chasm describes a gap in the adoption cycle. The intellectual history of this goes back to the Rogers curve, which is basically a bell chart conception of how people adopt technologies. It was created in 1957, and it basically divides the entire population from 0 to 100% of population into innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. People who are innovators start the technology. People who are early adopters, fast follow, and then the majority population comes along, and then the laggards bring up the tail. And you sort of describe all technology like this. But the primary innovation that Geoffrey Moore had in his book on Crossing the Chasm is literally titled Crossing the Chasm. Very, very influential book. He basically observed that the transition between stages is not all created equal. There's one particular stage where a lot of products fail, which is the chasm between early adopters and early majority. And why is that? My framing of it is that early adopters tend to be very forgiving and imaginative, and early majority need a lot of documentation and use cases before they would jump aboard. Right. So in other words, you can get very far with a minimal viable product and make a bunch of early adopters happy. But then you hit this ceiling in adoption unless you break through into the early majority and then the rest come along. So it is in your interest to understand how to break through those. It is my job to help companies break through those. And I think the world will hopefully be a better place if you can understand what drives this and how to make it happen consciously rather than accidentally.
That's an amazing explanation. And you said kind of documentation and use cases. Could you talk a bit about like why this is so hard for companies to do?
Well, because it's not core to the product. A lot of technologists want to believe, we just build the best products and then the rest will come. The Americans would say this is a very field of dreams idea, like build it and they will come. Most people find out that is not the case. Sometimes it is actually the case that you build something that the world just needs overwhelmingly and you never have to think about anything else. That is the privileged few that luck into something that the world just wants so desperately that they get to skip that part. But most people, they build the thing and then they have to market the thing. And it's always this back and forth between products and distribution that people always find. And in fact, this plays out not just over the course of one company, it plays out over a course of multiple companies. One very famous observation from Paul Graham is that first-time founders obsess about products and second-time founders obsess about distribution. Because the second-time founder knows they can build products, but they failed because they forgot distribution, or they couldn't get it, couldn't unlock it. Being able to write documentation and demonstrate use cases that help the less imaginative and less creative or more risk-averse people to see the benefit of your technology, whatever the tool you're working on, and dedicate some time into it. Every single dev tool adoption is a choice, and it's someone choosing to forego something that is probably more tried and tested in favor of something that is newer because of some story you sold them or some need that they have that isn't being fulfilled. Whatever that is, helping them understand that what you do to help them it should be your primary job. And it essentially is my distillation of what an ideal developer relations person does.
So they kind of, is it like they help meet those needs, or is it that they sort of make everything else so good that it doesn't matter that there aren't like strong use cases, say, for comparable organizations?
I think it's a mix of both. Sometimes people have needs and they don't realize your product fulfills those needs. So basically, you're just kind of unearthing existing latent demand. But other times, you are crossing the gap and bringing that feedback about use cases back into the product so that they can work on the product as well. What I just described, Geoffrey Moore's chasm, is about 30 years old. If you want to be a professional at this, you should probably develop a finer tuned philosophy on that. And that's where I start to develop my own type of taxonomy on how people cross the chasm, right? Because in my mind, if I told you about the innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, do you know the difference between them? It's very hard to describe apart from, I don't know, like some of these are more demanding than others, and some of these are later than others. That's pretty much it. And it's very hard to sort of distinguish like what stage you should be focusing on. So one framing or reframing that I've been working on is essentially this sort of renaming for more intuitive treatment. So let's say we have enthusiasts, we have pioneers, we have pragmatists, we have conservatives, and we have skeptics and newbies. So the enthusiast will do it because we can. They'll spend their nights and weekends, and they'll do it for free. The pioneers will see a pressing need. They'll buy the vision of the tool. They're willing to build what's missing. Like tools that are new are typically incomplete and require a lot of extra loving support and care to fill in the blanks. But the pioneers, in exchange, they want to be part of the founding story. They want to say, I was early in that technology, and I will associate myself with that career. Right? They'll call themselves ex-engineer, and the engineer is sort of associated with your tool, right? So like, I'm a Figma developer. I'm a Kubernetes, DevOps person. They like, it's literally in their job title and in their identity. That's how closely they tie it to themselves. Then the pragmatists, how do you say pragmatists? They're much more about things as they are today. They're not so willing to give you credit for things that don't exist yet, the things that are on the roadmap. They just want what makes sense today. It's very much about cost and benefit. They want well documented technology, then well tested, well supported, all the licensing figured out, everything that needs to be done for adoption at work. Because if you don't have any of that figured out, you're literally no value to them, because they just don't have time to help you figure out anything else. The conservatives are the fourth one. Conservatives, are even more conservative. They need certifications. They need social proof. They need you to win popularity surveys. They need to see adoption at big companies that are bigger than them to go, oh yeah, it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. They need to see a healthy job market where a lot of other people, it's easy to hire in that technology, and they need to see good third-party ecosystems that plug into that, right? So they just need to see a lot more work done by other people before they put in their work. So, it's they're not willing to go first, and that's fine. That's in fact that should be the default position for a lot of people on a lot of technologies. Otherwise, you waste your time cutting yourself on cutting edge stuff. And then finally, it's the skeptics and the newbies who understand everything that conservatives understand. They see all the cost and benefit, and they still don't like the technology. And the only reason they adopt it is because they don't have a choice. Or they don't want to do research. They're just like, just tell me like what everyone uses, I'll use that. I have no time to do any research whatsoever. So that's kind of like my interpretation of the Rogers curve, which is 5 stages that are probably named a bit better and more focused on dev tools. Because once you've understood these grouping of people, then your strategy evolves accordingly. So for example, if you're earlier stage, the tech is the story. All these people who are saying like, oh, we built X with Rust. Like, why does it matter that something is built with Rust? It actually doesn't really. But because you're early stage, people love to understand how you work and what you do. Open the hood up for me. The tech is the story. The cost doesn't matter. And in the later stage, the tech is no longer the story. The result is the story, and costs you want to optimize and get down. So the marketing changes, the way the way you tell your story, and the way the words that you choose, the use cases and the demos and the documentation, even all that changes based on where you are in the adoption curve.
That's so interesting. So it's like kind of the Hacker News phase where you're trying to get those early adopters, and things like what language and tech stack you use is important. And then, as you progress, it becomes more about, budget and use cases and Gartner reports.
Yeah. So that's my explanation. I think every DevTools person needs to have a mental model of where they are in the journey. And these journeys progress through different phases as well. So I think another thing to understand as well is sometimes the product itself has to change dramatically. Like, it doesn't survive stage change in the same format. Like, sometimes the product has to change dramatically to reach the next level. And understanding and studying how other products do that helps you to work on your product. And I think that is something that I'm very interested in. I would never say I'm an expert at it, but I think recognizing that there's something to be learned here is step one.
Yeah. And so let's say like you're just like airdropped into a company, a dev tool. Like, how are you going to go about figuring out like what stage they're at on the adoption cycle?
I think that's super interesting. Quite close approximation, you can just go by number of users, and that will be a very, very good metric already. Because by definition, the number of enthusiasts will be small, and the number of conservatives will be very large. So if you have in the tens to hundreds of users, they're all enthusiasts. If you have the thousands to tens of thousands, you're probably pioneers. If you're in the hundreds of thousands, you're pragmatists. And if you're in the millions, you're in the conservative and skeptic space. Also, having some Fermi estimates of like numbers of like number of users for each different platform gives you a really good idea. I have a longer post on like population developers on DX Tips if people want to read that. But so a rough estimate of number of people in Hacker News would be 6 million developers. And rough estimate, GitHub says in the state of Octoverse that they have 95 million developers. That's complete nonsense, because that is just the number of GitHub accounts, and not everyone who has a GitHub account is a developer, and not every and some people have multiple GitHub accounts for work and personal. And then, within that, you should know the rough populations of the relevant ecosystems that you're at. So there's something like 30 to 40 million JavaScript users versus, Python and versus C Sharp, and you should just like understand the rough population space, because that is actually your total addressable market. If you're a developer tool, that is it. Like you're not going to hit into the tens and hundreds of millions probably, because nothing ever gets there. So that's I think that's realistic, and then you sort of phrase your story the way that you like. Well, so sometimes as well, your audience is also a little bit smaller depending on the type of tool you are. So let's say you're not just about languages, you're also about the role within a company, right? So if you are in infrastructure tool or like a DevOps tool, a large company like Twitter maybe would have like 200 DevOps, then yes, like that is basically your total addressable market as well. So just kind of scaling your expectations by like the rough population size, I think is super useful. And then understanding that is also a moving target. Sometimes the populations do increase, and you want to have some amount of built-in expectation of like how different parts of the enterprise are growing. So, for example, one thing I'm focused on at Airbyte is the data engineer, which did not used to be a job title 5 years ago, and now is a pretty thriving community of let's say 100,000 people. And so that's not big, but itself is growing. It's probably doubling every year, and it doesn't take that long to be big.
Yeah, that's interesting. And could you talk a bit about Airbyte and like kind of the phase that you're at, and like kind of how that's impacting the decisions that you're making?
I would say probably Airbyte is in the pioneers phase, right? That's the second phase where people adopt it because they have a pressing need for your stuff, because no one else does it. So Airbyte is a open source data pipelines tool. It has the largest community of open source integrations with all sorts of data sources into your data warehouse, and that's a very fundamental need that you have to perform ELT into your data warehouse, so that you can do analysis and sometimes to drive business impacts as well. Whatever it is, if your data warehouse is growing, Amazon Redshift is the fastest growing Amazon service for the past like 10 years now. And you need to fill your data warehouse with stuff, and either you write your own scripts or you take an open source tool like Airbyte. You can also go for a paid tool, but the point is open source. It's still not V1.0, right? That's also another good metric to tell that you're in the pioneer phase. Like you haven't released the V1 of your product yet, and people are already using you. But people buy the vision, they're willing to build what's missing. We have people building our JavaScript SDK for us because we only focus on Python. And people want to be part of the story. So like giving out, labels like early Airbyte contributor, like you're part of the story for like our first 1,000 stars, like that kind of stuff is all part of building the community around the open source project. And so, yeah, I mean, at some point we will cross over into the pragmatism stage where cost benefit also does make sense. So we are trying to appeal on the cost benefit side, but that is not as important as the pressing need that we do things that other companies don't do. And so that puts you squarely in the pioneers camp. So I'll give you a couple of other things to think about. So we already talked about how the product itself might need to change in order to reach a broader audience. So sometimes you may need to write wrappers around it. You might need to write a low code version of your tool versus a higher code, like basically like to offer multiple levels of offerings for different levels of technicality and customizable needs. So one experience that you and I talked about before this recording. Previously I worked at Netlify, where I was helping to maintain the auth library. And people who open up the auth library might be surprised to find that we have 4 packages for Netlify auth, depending on your needs. One is an insertable widget that you can just kind of copy and paste with no configuration. A second one is a sort of JavaScript library that's just plain JS and no frameworks. A third would be a React hooks library that doesn't come with any styles, and the fourth would be a React library that ships a component that you can use that does come with styles. And so, do you want styles or not? Do you use React or not? Do you do you code or not? And so you have all these offerings to try to reach multiple people, and the product does take on different forms in order to serve different needs and different audiences. Explaining that does take some time. So there is something to be said about refusing to do that until you absolutely have to. So I do think that I was a little bit too eager in giving all these offerings, because that confused the story, and people came away with a negative impression that it was too complex, when really I was just trying to make multiple people happy.
So maybe at the beginning, it's like you just focus in on that one group.
The one offering, right? So that people don't have this extended conversation about the different offerings that you have. Because I think a lot of people, when they work in DevTools, they try to say like, oh yeah, we can do everything. Like, you know, we're so flexible, we're so capable. That's because they have lack of conviction on who their target audience is. And we definitely had that. We still have that. But the other thing is that the company that wins the enthusiast and pioneer phase may not be the company that wins the rest. So the company may not capture the value of the technology that it creates. So the canonical example used to be Docker. Docker Inc. Used to be a company itself, and then underperformed expectations. It was recently revived, and I hear actually they seem to be doing well under new management. But Docker Inc. itself definitely failed to achieve its potential despite revolutionizing everyone's virtual machines. And so sometimes, a lot of times, especially if you create a successful standard, the work still has to be done to build a platform around it such that you capture the value, or you let go of it. So another example in the backend world is OpenTelemetry, which is come from nowhere, like in basically a very, very short time, like about the past 3 years, to become the industry standard for telemetry, for tracing. And the company that was the biggest, largest champion, biggest contributor, Lightstep, didn't fail to monetize, and eventually got acquired and sold out. And all the core people have left. So it's an awkward conversation in the industry, because everyone loves the technology, but the people that were most responsible for it didn't get the credit. And and you see, occasionally this happens here and there. And I think for people who are choosing to work in DevTools and choosing to work really hard on pushing things along the curve, you need to be thinking about how you're not going to essentially have all your work thrown away by some strategic misstep. I don't know I don't have the complete answer. But all I know is like there are these examples there. Everyone in the industry wonders about them. It's one of those things where like you just kind of have to try to learn from as many examples as possible, because it's kind of really hard to know the truth, because you also have to basically work there to understand the full picture. And all we have are snippets of like comments from people, sometimes whispered in hallway conversations rather than in the official press. We're all interested in working hard in technology, but also benefiting, hopefully, from our success. And 100%. when people work really hard and fail to succeed, that is interesting. That is that needs to be discussed. And in most cases, no one's saying they could have done any better. All we're just trying to do is that we're fellow travelers, and we're trying to learn. And any port in a storm, and you try to learn from what's available out there. One more thing I'll offer you. So what I've documented here, the whole Rogers curve: enthusiasts, pioneers, pragmatists, conservatives, skeptics, and newbies. This is elements of demand, like the people who are users of the technology. Another dimension that you should think about in terms of development of any technology is the development of the supply of that technology. So there's another concept called the Wardley map. Have you heard of it?
No, I haven't.
It's by Simon Wardley, who's a Brit. And he tends to document these very complicated charts of entire industries. So I'll just kind of verbally describe it, but I highly recommend people check it out. So on the left, you have value chain, going from invisible on the bottom to visible at the top, which is basically at the top, it's closer to humans, closer to customers. At the bottom is closer to machines. And then that's the vertical axis, and then the horizontal axis on the left is genesis, the original inception of the technology, and on the right is commodity, which is the more commoditized version of that technology, right? So from invention, so his stages on the horizontal axis are genesis, custom built, product, and commodity. So basically in increasing orders of commoditization, from invention towards every company custom building in-house, towards buying off the shelf as a service from other companies, and then finally a commodity service where you don't even care what brand of thing you're buying. You just, to me, like, I have a mouse. I don't care what brand it is. I just need a mouse. So that's the chart of like of any technology, and basically the main observation, the main takeaway I have from this is that the tendency of technology is to start from invention, going into custom building, going to productization, and going to commodity. And there's a lot of money to be made from every single stage change there. It does parallel a little bit the Rogers curve that we talked about, but instead of a single company getting adoption, this is more about entire industries getting distribution. And finally, understanding like what's moving in relation to others, right? So if other parts of your stack, whatever your stack is in delivering technology to end users, if other parts of your stack are moving towards a more commoditized direction, that's actually good news for you, because your part of the stack becomes more valuable. So like choosing where to be in the stack is very valuable, and then choosing to understand what parts of the stack you can commoditize while also making sure that other parts commoditize faster than you is the entire name of capitalism.
And is the fact that other parts become more commoditized, that makes your part more valuable because that's where people differentiate themselves, is it? Or
Yep. So there's another canonical essay in this topic. It's called Strategy Letter 5.
That's a fantastic name.
Letters 1 through 4, not as useful, but Strategy Letter 5 was the good one. It's from Joel Spolsky, the founder of Stack Overflow. And there you go. It's basically the rule of commoditize your complements. If you've seen this diagram in 100 different landing pages, which is your tool at the center of the universe, and every other tool on the left and on the right. We plug into everything and we deliver to everything, right? Like that is essentially Airbyte, but also like a billion other tools. Matt Slotnick, who I think tracks the data ecosystem, calls this the hardest working graphic in software, because every single company says we're special. We're not like the other tools. Everyone else is commoditized, but we're the only ones that do XYZ. To the extent, that's obviously not true in some cases, but you want to find where the pockets where it is more true than others, and that's where you make money. But so here's the main insight that I want to offer people. Like, try to develop a two-dimensional map of where your industry is. Use whatever adoption curve you want. Use whatever value metric that you want. Understand where your dev tool is in relation to all the others, and you will have a better insight on how to market and develop your tool than most, because most people have never thought about tech in this way.
I'm going to take that on myself. Where can people learn more about this, Shawn?
So I haven't written about it yet.
We need a blog post. The people need a blog post.
I know, exactly. So I did so this has been cooking in my drafts for like 2 years. I did a talk about this at the recent Svelte Summit. So Svelte Summit is one example that I've been taking on as essentially a project to understand how to get a dev tool over the chasm. And so the talk that I gave at Svelte Summit was 10xing Svelte. Essentially, when I joined Svelte in 2019, all the way to 2022, just kind of recapping what we did and how we went from a very, very small project towards top of the rankings in most JavaScript ecosystem surveys, and then the usage itself 10x'd. And then the talk was like, okay, we have 10x over the past 3 years. How do we 10x from here to the next thing? And do we want to? Because that's an interesting part of open source communities and networks that doesn't get talked about enough, which is sometimes bigger isn't always better. Sometimes there is an optimal size for a thing. The only reason bigger is always better is because of VCs. They always want you to grow like a cancer. But sometimes there's a natural size to things, and trying to push it beyond its size actually ruins the core technology. And so I think there was a very honest discussion that we had at the summit. And I basically presented like 5 different models of growth there. That is essentially the talk version of the blog post that I would be eventually putting out on DX Tips.
I'll put a link out in the description as well. Okay, I'm going to watch that right now, I think.
It's a very fast talk. I have decided to optimize for YouTube and to go extremely fast, but then leave breadcrumbs for people if they want to learn more, because then I get to cover a lot more things.
I think that's a good approach. I found that in general, like a lot of your articles, like I read it, but I'm like, whoa, this feels like a whole section of knowledge I know nothing about that I need to just dig into.
Yeah, that's so great. It is arguably not a good principle of communication. There are other people who have broader reach than me that dumb things down essentially for clear communication, and I'm probably missing out on doing that just because I have this like inherent pride or narcissistic tendency, whatever you call it, of like trying to leave everything on the table, like just to put down everything that I know so that you can get into my head, or you can correct me if I'm wrong. Whereas, a lot of people, when they write, they tend to be very concerned with being a fully formed version of themselves with no flaws. And I kind of dislike that. So I try to reflect that in my work.
Yeah, I think it comes across really well. Like I mean, your background was like hedge funds, right? Before, like,
so I
imagine like kind of, it feels like you're kind of bringing that approach and thinking very analytically and strategically about the whole space.
Yeah, I don't know if it's annoying, but like, I can't help it, so I'm not going to change it. But but so I do think that most people haven't seen the depth of analysis that is typical in financial investment reporting, and then most people haven't taken that philosophy and tried to apply it to all forms of decision making, including technology decisions. Yeah. What we're talking about is like telescoping from the micro, which is individual company development phases and the philosophies around like how to getting your word out there, and like this is what sort of DevRel is on a very sort of quotidian basis. But really, when you think about it on a strategic level, it's about entire industries. And if you want to make an impact, you have to do that. And so the formal term for this is is industrial organization. There are entire branches of economics that study this, and so I encourage you to I'm only basically a amateur at this. I pick and choose from the theories that I happen to like. Another thing that you should think about is vertical versus horizontal splits in industry and how these develop over time. I have a fuller treatment in my book. I think you can read it for free. The chapter that is relevant to business and tech. So you just go to learninpublic.org and look at the free chapters. It's the 4th one.
That's all we've got time for. Shawn, thanks so much for joining. I've wanted to have you on this podcast for a really long time, so it's a big milestone for me. So thank you so much. And where can people learn more if they want to hear more from you?
So I've been making a conscious effort to not say Twitter, because I think there's a decent chance that Twitter may not be around, or I may not be around on Twitter forever. So the permanent site would be swyx.io, which is my main blog. I have 2 other blogs because I have a problem. So one is DX Tips. It's literally dx.tips, and that is my focused DevRel and Dev Experience, DevTools writing. And then 2 is my AI blog, which is LSpace. Just go on my site and you'll see all the links.
Amazing. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again next week.